So we're at a wetland habitat this morning, and this one is kind of urban, I suppose. There's housing all around, paved lots near. This is the mill pond at Rock Lake in Jefferson County. But it does show a nice collection of aquatic plants and wetland plants. Just wanted to highlight here. So if you took the wetland coefficient of a lot of these plants, you would see that they are typically found in wet habitats. We're kind of coming in from a mowed lawn area, so it might be worth pointing out a few of our more just sort of weedy or ruderal species in here. Good collection. We've got some plantain in the foreground. We have a plantain. So plantain is a interesting plant. It's a dicot, but it has features that really probably get you thinking more monocot. So it has these parallel veined leaves. And the flowers don't help you a whole lot either. This is a close relative. This is genus Plantago, and the family Plantagenaceae has some of our really showy flowered plants like foxglove and beard tongue. And the flowers on here, this is a sort of spike of flowers that are really nondescript. These are wind pollinated, so we see the stamens sticking out with their big anthers blowing around in the breeze. So it's related to some showy flowered species that are more obviously dicots. This one's a little harder to place if you don't know what it is. So this is one I'd say to get familiar with, otherwise you might be in a lot of trouble trying to key it out. And there actually are two plantain species in here. The one with the really slender leaves, narrow-leaved, sorry, I didn't get a good one there. Narrow-leaved plantain here. This is English plantain. Plantago lanceolata, so lanceolate referring to the leaf shape there. A little bit bigger stalk leading, so a long naked stalk leading to the flowering portion of the inflorescence there. And then another one that's in here, this is also a plantain with bigger, broader leaves. So this could be our common one, Plantago major. Could be another one, and the flowers on here looks like they're not doing quite as much. Looks like we might be female phase there, so either not yet open or maybe, can't quite tell. I think I'll just say not yet open here. I think down at the very bottom we've got some that are showing their stigmas out. So it almost really behaves like a grass, but this is a dicot, kind of a weedy group. Plantago or the plantains. Also in the grass here we've got some of our usual suspects. We've got the creeping lawn clover here, Trifolium repens. We've got the one of our chickweeds, Cerastium fontanum probably. Let's see the leaves on there. Another bean family in here. We've got the black medic, Medicago lupulina, and a good collection of another bean that I don't think we've really talked about in the flowering state before. I think I had it at the Corth Park Prairie. This one is a sweet clover, genus Melolotus. You can see the trifoliolate compound leaf. Here's one good example. And then really an extended raceme with bean family flowers on there. And one of our rather larger bean family plants here. So that would be Melolotus albus. We have above one of our weedy tree species. This is the mulberry, probably the white mulberry. The scientific name of white mulberry is a little bit misleading. I think people might think it refers to the fruits, but the fruits on these can go really all shades. So sometimes they mature white, sometimes they mature more red, and more often I'd say they mature like dark black colored. Mulberry leaves are pretty distinctive once you get to know them. They're shiny, and they have kind of irregular shapes. So a toothy margin, irregular shapes. That one looks a little chewed up. And sometimes, here's some examples. Sometimes they have some lobing that's also a little bit irregular. So quite often on this tree, not lobed. Sometimes you find other mulberry trees that have more more lobing, less lobing, but something to watch out for. If you see this kind of lobing, it's in the fig family, kind of maybe reminds you of a fig leaf if you're familiar with those. All right, what do we got in here? So in here we've got some grasses. Really any wetland wouldn't, certainly an urban or disturbed wetland like this wouldn't be complete without our reed canary grass, so good number of that in there. These are your Timothy grass. A little bit ratty, looks like they've got some spent anthers in there. And maybe a couple more weedy species. Over in this part of the wetland, we've got one of our milkweeds. This is just common milkweed. So common milkweed makes these big globes of the inflorescence, kind of a lighter pink, really abundant flowers in there. Very distinctive kind of flower to the milkweed. Really hard to mistake that for anything else. And then opposite leaves, and then if I pulled these apart, we'd get the milky sap on there. Also kind of interesting in this wetland, we've got some big flowers in the morning glory group. This is a family called Convolvulaceae, in the it's a close relative of tomatoes, potatoes, and then this group is actually the same group that we get sweet potatoes from. So this is a genus called Calistegium, the bindweed I call it, or I think it's got some other common names. So big, these are really big flowers. Obviously fused corolla of 5 parts, you can kind of tell there. So it's 5 in the shape and radially symmetrical. Just a couple of sepals there, which is kind of interesting. And then our reproductive parts and some insects in there doing their business. This family has stem twining. So these are the stems of this twining around a cattail. And its leaves in this family typically have big basal lobes. So palmate venation and big basal lobes on there. So pretty hard to miss this one, Calistegia sepium. And obviously we can talk about our cattails. Kind of a good time of year to cover cattails. So cattails, their inflorescence this is more familiar to you, I'm sure, the kind of corn dog looking part of the inflorescence. That's the female part. So a little bit earlier this summer, this would have had female flowers on it. And now it's going in to develop some fruits, which are basically sort of like kind of like a dandelion, a seed inside of a hairy parachute. If you've seen those open in the fall, or sometimes they wait until the spring when you can access them. The male flowers are in a different part of this. So these are the fading parts of the male flowers, the male part of the inflorescence. So we've got a female part of the inflorescence here. Then a break, so there's a little bit of a clean spot without any flowers. That's useful in telling our species apart. That would make this the narrow-leaved cattail, or related. And then a little bit later in the summer, this will just kind of fall apart. And we've already seen some of that in here. So you just sort of have this little stalk. So I think you've probably seen cattails illustrated, kids' books or whatever. And they have this corn dog looking bit and then a stick coming out of the corn dog. That stick has a kind of a remnant function. So it's left over from the part of the inflorescence that was producing male flowers and distributing pollen there. Another wetland plant in here in a good state of reproduction. One of our bulrushes, soft stem bulrush. So round, kind of squishy stem, spongy. And then the kind of characteristic cone-like spikelets of Cyperaceae, the sedge family. So this one doesn't have edges. The soft stem bulrushes are round in cross section. So one of the sort of caveats to the sedges have edges rhyme is that the stems are triangular if they're leafy. And so this is a long, really leafless stem leading to the inflorescence. So good group to be familiar with. All right, marching our way through lots and lots to see here. Maybe a little bit often overlooked on the surface of the water here, we've got a whole bunch of this stuff. These are individual plants of a plant called duckweed. So it may be a little hard to get an individual one of these. The whole plant, the floating part, they call it a frond. So it's sort of a leaf, but it's also sort of the whole body of the plant. So it's called frond. They're good at reproducing vegetatively. So this one here that I'm nudging has 3 fronds that all would have come from the same source. So this plant does in fact flower, can in fact make fruits and seeds, but it's actually really good at getting around, can disperse, can reproduce all vegetatively. And there's another, so there's just sort of common name duckweed. The leafy ones in here, I want to call them they're looking a little more like another genus called Spirodella. They've got the lines on top of the frond. One way to tell those apart, the genus Lemna should have 1 root coming out per frond, and Spirodella would have more than 1 root per frond. I might have to look at that more carefully a little bit later. There is just a great habitat here. Great habitat to have downtown. I see them, but I can't seem to isolate a good one. They're a little bit beat up. There we go. So there's one of our duckweeds that lives underwater, submersed. And it's not looking very happy here. Could be that it's getting shaded out by the other duckweeds and we can find it doing better somewhere else. So this one is Lemna trisulca. This is one kind of unusual for the duckweeds. Lives underwater, just under the water surface. And then another one that might be a little hard to point out is part of the genus that are the world's smallest flowering plants. So those little green pill looking things on there are individual fronds of another duckweed. I guess their common name is duckmeal, genus Wolfia. And it's related, so all of the floating duckweeds here are in the same family, Lemnaceae, and they have a little bit different sizes. Again, all flowering, all also capable of a lot of vegetative reproduction. All right, let's see. I think I'll reset and try to get us some look at some aquatic plants in a second here. So I'm at a good place to observe some aquatic plants. Maybe not the best place to grab them, but I'll try to point some out. Here's one that's flowering. One flower there, another flower over there. This is actually a member of the buttercup genus, Ranunculus, family Ranunculaceae. And not too many, but a few members of this genus are fully aquatic. So totally leaves underwater, and the leaves here, that stem belongs to the buttercup. Highly dissected, meaning that the blade is really reduced down to the veins only. And that's a way to increase the surface area to volume ratio, give them more chance to interact with the water, where they get their nutrients from, and also where they can get their gases that they need to use for photosynthesis. So dissolved gases or things like that they can get in for doing their photosynthesis. Maybe just want to highlight, we've got some nice clear water here, so you can kind of see the aquatic plants without getting deep in the water. It's a little hard to appreciate them. Usually to study aquatic plants, if you want to really see them up close, you would take a rake or something and get these out of the water. There's a few to see. I'll just kind of point out what I can recognize. There's a few individuals of curly pondweed in there. So the leaves are all curled up. Kind of in that area are some, one just called waterweed, genus Elodea. There are some water milfoils There's one in the foreground there. And then heading out there are some reproductive stalks. So one there, and a couple more over there. Those belong to water milfoil. Pretty common for water plants to grow underwater but need to flower above the water. It takes a lot of adaptation to make pollen work underwater. Much easier for these plants whose ancestors were living on land. Much easier for them to pollinate in the old way by getting their pollen transported in the air, either just through wind pollination or through animal-aided pollination. So depending on the time of year, you can see these flowering. Another thing about aquatic plants is a lot of our species, they don't really need to flower, so they can persist for long periods of time, years after years, just persist underwater. They can reproduce vegetatively, that's pretty common. And so sometimes it requires the conditions to be just right for them to flower and then produce seeds. So here's another one of our milkweeds. This is so-called the swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. The common milkweed we saw earlier had flowers open and thriving, and this one has just got a bunch of flower buds. If we look at the Phyllotaxis, we've got opposite leaves on this one. Compared to the common milkweed, much more slender, lanceolate shaped leaves. Can test it for milky sap, and there we go. Different color to the flowers here, kind of a smaller flower in general. And then, as the name implied, swamp milkweed, this would be one that you would find more typically in wetlands. All right, great collection of underwater aquatic plants here. These are all flowering plants, and I guess as I go, I'll tell you which ones are producing flowers underwater. I'll start off with one that does do that. Again, we're not usually going to find flowers on them, but it'd be awesome if we did. This one is called hornwort, ceratophyllum, and this is one of the most distantly related plants to any other flowering plant. It's got some really kind of ancient features, kind of a tough feel overall, and the leaves are dissected, but then they're dichotomously branched. So as they branch, they fork into two equal parts, and they do that a couple times. They're also a little bit spiny there, so this is Ceratophyllum demersum, our really most common hornwort that we have. The leaves are whorled, so if you trace them down to the base, you could find out which one of those is an individual leaf, and then it has the dichotomous branching once or twice, but leaves overall are whorled. This one does flower underwater. It has separate male and female flower clusters, and I don't see any of those today. I mentioned the water milfoil before. I'll get you one of those. Also has whorled leaves, but these leaves are pinnately dissected. So the water milfoil part, the milfoil is comes from French and basically means thousands of leaves. So as you can see, lots and lots of little leaf parts on here anyway. It has a feathery look to it. Lots of species of milfoil. This one looks to be our native northern milfoil. Let's see if I can confirm that. Tell your milfoil species apart based on their Phyllotaxis. So this one has whorled leaves. The number of, I guess we call those veins on the leaves would be useful. Other features help you tell the different species apart. And then I guess with aquatic plants, you don't typically find them, or you can't necessarily reliably find them flowering. So usually you're able to key them out without having flowers present. Another one in here, kind of an exciting one to show you. This is a carnivorous aquatic plant called a bladderwort, and it has leaves with little pouches all over them. So those pouches are traps for underwater invertebrates. Sort of like a Venus flytrap, they snap shut They have a little bit of suction that pull the animals in. And this plant is able to grow and make use of more nutrients than are normally available in the environment, because it actually traps animals to get those. Bladderwort, genus Utricularia. This one has flowers that come up above the water. Don't see any of those right here right now. Here's our curly pondweed. This is one of our invasives, and I showed this one to you at Bluff Creek. So here it is again, the curly leaf margin, really just a dead giveaway. Overall leaf shape is kind of elliptic, toothy on the margins, alternate phyllotaxis, and no reproductive parts on these, but these have a stalk that comes up above the water when they flower. Other pondweeds. Oh, here's one with fruits on it. How exciting. All right, so here are the fruits. They're underwater, but the flowers would have been above water. They're achenes on a stalk, kind of a spike stalk. This is a linear-leaved pondweed, and pondweeds have alternate phyllotaxis. They have a feature which is a stipule. There's one kind of wagging around in the breeze, in the water right there above my thumb. It's a single stipule that comes out from the base of the flower, and that can be useful for knowing that you've got a pondweed. Looks like we might have a couple species here of linear pondweed. This is a flat stem pondweed, Potamogeton zostriformis. Oh, sorry, to go back one, I have a hornwort with some flowers on it. So they're not open yet, but this is what a ball of male flowers looks like on a hornwort. The female flowers, a little bit inconspicuous when they're flowers, but when they go on to making fruits, they have a very large, spiky fruit. Pretty cool. You might want to look that one up. Some other pondweeds, pretty rich in pondweeds here. So we have the linear leaf pondweeds, the curly pondweed. This one's got more of a tapering elliptic leaf shape. Still would have the stipules. I don't have much material of that one right now. What else have we got in here? Come back to you in a second. So I'm just peering off of a dock right now, so I've got a little bit better access to the aquatic plants. But this one has been kicked up from the substrate, so it's been dislodged from underground, and it shows us the roots and the base of this plant that was growing as a rosette. So all the leaves coming from the base, long linear leaves. So this one gets the common name of tape grass or eel grass, genus called Vallisneria. This is a monocot. It's got some band of airspace tissue running up the leaf, and then at the leaf tip, another giveaway for Vallisneria is a little bit toothy. This is something you'd see with your hand lens a little bit better. And this one flowers by, it has a female flower on a long spiral pedicel that the flower actually goes up to the water surface, and the male flowers float on the water surface. Really cool if you get it timed just right. I think we're a little early season for that right now, but something cool to watch out for. We've got a little bit of a wetland shrub in here. You can see it's taking over this habitat very nicely. This one's called, I'll give you the scientific name, Decadon verticillatus. It's related to purple loosestrife, and it's got whorled leaves, and it's a shrub, and it does this thing called layering, where the shrub branches grow out into the water, and in subsequent years it can root from there. So it's very good at kind of colonizing shoreline that isn't exactly shoreline just yet. So it'll kind of reach out as far as it can up beyond places where it can root reliably. You can see that it's done just that. So it sort of colonized this habitat. In the background are some cattails, but otherwise it's pretty dense with the Decadon in there. Well, it wouldn't be an aquatic habitat if we didn't look at the water lilies. These are pretty characteristic of aquatic habitats. They have a rhizome underwater, so down about there where these leaves are attached, and then they have a long petiole leading to a floating leaf with the attachment point at the middle, and then a notch. We've got a variety of things that look like water lilies. These are kind of the true water lilies in the genus Nymphaea, and one thing you look at for those is that the notches are pointy, so it comes out to a pointed notch and then sort of back in. Another one that we have is called spatterdock. That one produces yellow flowers and it has rounded lobes. I don't see any in this habitat, but those are kind of your two big ones that you would notice. They're in the same family, but otherwise pretty easy to tell apart, and not a lot of species of either one. Pretty easy to identify. Another emergent wetland plant is here. This is one of our irises. This is the yellow iris. I happen to know that because I've seen them flowering here. Irises, we have a few plants like cattails and iris that have these long linear emergent leaves. On the iris, they have definitely pointed tips. The cattails have rounded tips. And the tips on the iris just sort of look a little asymmetrical. Another probably easier way to identify these is that iris leaves do an interesting thing called equitant phyllotaxis. So they are flat, but they're kind of flattened in the wrong dimension. And so this one is like wrapped around the next one over. If I pull it away, you can kind of see. So this one here is tucked into a pocket of this one all the way down. So you kind of have them all pocketing among each other toward the bottom. That's characteristic of iris. We can see there were flowers, but now we're moving on to fruits here. Just a dehiscent capsule on those yellow iris. Here's one that is a frequent weed of wetlands, but also it's pretty good at being weedy in places that aren't all that wet. This is a member of the tomato family, Solanaceae, and this is called bittersweet nightshade, Solanum dulcamera. The flower is very distinctive color on this panicle inflorescence, and what's going on with the flowers is that they have this big orange cluster of anthers. So the anthers are very big and showy, and they have a special pollination type called buzz pollination, where an animal, typically a bumblebee, would have to come grab this flower and vibrate to release the pollen. So they're like little pores at the tip of the anthers. Sorry, it's not focusing very well. So the anthers don't just pop open and release all their pollen. They have a pore at the tip, and somebody's got to shake the pollen out like it's a salt shaker. And that vibration does that. So animals with the right behavior can make this plant give up its pollen. Otherwise, they might be interested in eating pollen, but they just can't get to it if they don't know that trick. Pollinators are stymied by this one trick. The white part that's sticking out, that's the style and stigma. So all the parts there for reproduction. These mature into red berries, which look a lot like kind of elongated tomatoes. Another couple that we have in here, there are some members of the carrot family. So carrot family, we have highly divided compound leaves and sheathing bases on those. And this is one of our wetland members of the carrot family. Another one we've seen before, this is one of our sedges in the genus Carex. A little bit better view of them from the side. So just a little bit closer look at a flower of the white water lily. The water lily flowers have lots and lots of petals. A little bit more on these. The yellow flowered ones have only 4 petals. So I guess I should say this is particular to the white water lily genus Nymphaea. Inside of there, I don't know how easy it is to see, the orange stamens are visible, the anthers on those, lots and lots of anthers, and then at the very center would be a fused gynoecium of quite a few carpels. I always find it interesting when people depict water lilies. They typically draw them as having the flower somehow coming out of the leaf. And I don't know where that came from. It's one of my life quests to maybe figure out why that happens. The flower is produced separately, so the flower goes all the way down on a pedicel to the rhizome, and the leaves are produced independently from the rhizome. So leaves on a long petiole, flower on a long pedicel. Everybody comes up to or above the water surface, and then these flowers, after they flower, they're going to sink down and mature their fruits underwater. Almost missed these. These are monocots in the genus Sagittaria, known by the common name of arrowhead, and they have very distinctive leaf shape, so big, pointy, rearward-facing basal lobes. You can see the venation is parallel for most of that, so it's sort of a, I guess you'd call that parallel, but with really big lobes at the base. This one is showing a whole lot of really arrowhead looking leaves. Other members of the genus Sagittaria, they don't have to have these arrowhead leaves to belong to the genus Sagittaria. We don't have any flowers on these. They'll happen later in the year. Those would help you to identify to species. There's also a lot of variation among individuals with the shape of the leaves, so might be a little trickier to key one of these out exactly to species, but easy to identify at least what we've got here as genus Sagittaria. Some other stuff we've got in the foreground, some other individuals of the swamp milkweed here. So again, not really, sometimes not a whole lot of flowers in that inflorescence. We've got some dock, genus Rumex. So curly leaf margin. This one has that ochrea sheath I mentioned once before. Kind of fades away a lot faster in this group. And then sort of triangular fruits, achenes, with little wings on them. So there's like a set of bracts enclosing them that make up those wings right now. We've got our, well, let's see, there's actually a gallium, a bed straw in here. So whorled leaves. Whorl of 4, mostly linear leaves there. Small flowers, looks like we got 3 petals on those. So I don't have an ID right now, but it should be easy to identify that one. And then another plant that's common in wetlands, this is a member of the genus Mentha, or the mints. This is in the mint family, obviously. Has a square stem if I roll it around in my fingers. Quite hairy. Opposite phyllotaxis, opposite decussate, so rotated 90 degrees at each node. That gives it the square shape on the stem. And then members of the genus Mentha, they are all mint scented, so if you crush them up, really pleasant smell to encounter in the wetlands. This one is another submersed aquatic plant. It's related to pondweeds, but it's in a different genus, Stockenia. Has more of a fan type of leaf arrangement, so the branches become branches, and you get these multiply branched fan appearances, but otherwise share some similarities. Just the underwater growth form. The inflorescence is present on here, so we've got some developing achenes on there, very similar to what we saw in the pondweed genus Stockenia here. Maybe we get another look at those duckweeds from before. So I was feeling like we had genus Spirodella before, and sure enough, way more than one root per frond here. So we've got 5 fronds, and I can't quite even count them. So 5 fronds and 20 roots, or at least 10 roots. So way more than one per frond. Gives us the genus Spirodella. There could be some lemna mixed in here. Once you find one duckweed, you tend to find a lot of the group. So I think these little guys, yeah, so there's one each. So those are members of the genus Lemna. So kind of interesting, all in one habitat. We've got Spirodella, kind of the big, many-rooted duckweed. We found Lemna, kind of the classical duckweed, and Wolfia, the water meal, and that's 3 out of 5 genera in the family.